Happy Friday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books. I literally hear that going around my head in my dreams. I know the next bit off by heart too. Are you ready for it? If you're new here, Balancing the Books is the game I play every month where I add up all the books that came onto my TBR with all the books that I came off my TBR and try and make those numbers balanced. Hands up if you can also say the words along with me at this point. When I finished all of my reading for June, I had not managed to balance my books, and so I got one book that was put into purgatory. I will link to last month's video if you want to go and check what that means and catch up on it. But basically, this book, Hummingbird, got put into purgatory. I had to read it this month or it would get unhauled, and I read it, which means that my June books are a month late but officially balanced. Before I move on to my July books, I will just quickly wrap up what I thought of this one. This is Hummingbird by Tristan Hughes, and I liked it okay, but I just never really got into it. It had a very, very strong sense of place. That's something that was really praised about it from what I read, and I definitely did feel like I could see the landscape being brought to life, but I couldn't quite see the characters being brought to life, and that's sort of the most important part for me. There was a lot of sadness in this book and a lot of pain, and right towards the end of the book I started to feel some of those emotions I think I was supposed to have been feeling. But most of the way through, to be honest, it was a bit of a slog. I was kind of having to force myself through this one. So I think I gave it 2 out of 5. Not my favourite, but I think also just not for me. It's not to say that it wasn't a very beautifully written book. But it will find a new home. And now we move on to the month of July. My hair is very greasy and also needs a trim. Wow, I'm really noticing these things now. I'm staring at my face so big. The size of my TBR at the beginning of July was 36 books. And the very first thing that I did was borrow a book from Scribd and then read it. So far, so balanced. That book was America Is Not the Heart by Elaine Castillo. I really, really enjoyed this book. It had characters, unlike Hummingbird, this one had characters that I really, really did believe in and could see brought to life and really just fell in love with. Particularly, the strongest part of the whole book for me personally was the opening. So the very first section is told in second person, which worked really well. Sometimes that can be gimmicky and sometimes it can be done so well. So this section was about a girl called Paz growing up in the Philippines and moving to the US and getting married and all of that. And it's told in very fast pace in second person. So you, the reader, are Paz. It is telling you your story, just kind of hitting all of the points of your life. And I found it really effective. It sucked me straight in. I felt like everything that went wrong for Paz, I felt it really deeply. Everything that went right, I felt it really excitingly. It was only a short section, but it really worked to get me like hooked into this book from page 1. After that, we then actually switch the main character that we're focusing on. It then gets told in a more stanza. I think it's in third person. It might be first person. I don't remember. Either way, it's something that is like more normal. And it's about Paz's niece by marriage, so her husband's niece, who is called Hieronima. Paz's own daughter is also called Hieronima, so they get called Roni.
I mean, it's clearly pronounced Ronnie, now that I think about it, not Roni.
The daughter is Roni and the niece is Hiro, which, by the way, is one of my favourite girls' names of all time, so that was very exciting. And it's about Hiro, who has suffered through, we don't know that much at the beginning, we learn more about her as the book goes on, but she's been estranged from her family, she has injuries, she's been living in the Philippines, and she has now kind of escaped to come and stay with her aunt and uncle in the States. And a lot of it is us following the bond between Hiro and Roni. That was a really, really important part of the story. Also, Paz's kind of distrust of Hiro. So it's very interesting, having been sucked in from Paz's perspective right from the beginning. Paz is then a peripheral character who is very distant. She really keeps her distance from Hiro, and so we only kind of start to get back into her mindset as the book goes on. At first she becomes this just peripheral, distant, distrustful character, and that was kind of jarring, but in a way that I found really intriguing. We also get a queer love story between Hiro and a girl that she meets who works at a hair salon. So there's loads of characters being brought on, and that other character, the woman that she has a romance with, whose name I've now forgotten, but we do later on in the book get another of those cool little second person sections following her life story. So really every character gets explored. And there's a lot of characters that we meet, and they all have their little moment in the spotlight. We get to learn a bit more about their history and what makes them who they are. So I got to learn a lot about the history of the Philippines in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the kind of violent history there that I didn't know anything about. But it is mostly set in the States, and it's about this kind of community of immigrants, because the place that they live is mostly people from the Philippines. So it's a part of the States that I don't know very well. So it's very interesting to kind of be submersed into this new community. Yeah, I really, really liked it, would read it again, would love to know what happens after the book ends to Hiro and Roni. Just, yeah, lots of love for this book. I felt there were parts where it dragged, which is why I think for me this one was a 4-star rather than a 5-star read. But yeah, I would read it again. Okay, then I read a book from my trolley, Yours Cheerfully by AJ Pearce. This is my proof cover here. So this is the sequel to Dear Mrs. Bird. Dear Mrs. Bird I read about 2, even 3 years ago now, and absolutely loved it. It was one of my favourite books of the year. In the year that I read it, I gave it 5 stars. So this is the long-awaited sequel. Both of these books are historical. They're set during the Second World War, and the main character is a girl called Emmy Lake who wants to be a female war correspondent. And in the first book, she ends up working for this newspaper and working for an agony aunt who is very formidable. That's Mrs. Bird. And now Mrs. Bird is now out of the picture, so this sequel is about Emmy kind of going on in her career and finding more ways that she can help women and learning more about what women were coping with, suddenly being brought into the workplace in like much bigger numbers than ever before and not really being looked after, not having any of their needs considered, like the fact that a lot of them had children and their husbands were at war and they had no other childcare. So it's really about Emmy kind of learning all of this and trying to do her bit to help the women. So it's very jolly and fun. I really enjoyed it. I didn't fall in love with it as much as I fell in love with the first one, but I don't think that's because the book wasn't as good. I think it's just because the first one was such a breath of fresh air. It was something really new. So this time it sort of took me a little bit longer to get back into the, oh okay, this is frightfully jolly all the time sort of tone. But I loved it. I mean, it's really nice getting to explore often quite sad and upsetting parts of history with this very bright and cheery and make the best of it mentality. I think that's a nice kind of contrast. Overall, I would still really recommend this one, but I would definitely recommend that you read Dear Mrs. Bird first, and then this is just delightful to catch back up with the characters. Then I read Magma. This is another proof I've had on my trolley. This was a very quick read. I read it, it took me less than the duration of my quick train journey, and then I was left on the rest of the train without a book. I tore through this one. It's very dark. So this is about a 20-year-old girl who gets sucked into this relationship with an older man. I think he's about 30 or 30 something, who is really toxic, and we as the reader can see that he is really toxic, and she can see that he has some toxic abusive behaviours, but she also just adores him. And a lot of what we can see as red flags and people around her can see as red flags, she sees as just signs of his brilliance and his genius. So it's quite scary watching her getting completely sucked into this relationship, really losing herself in it, becoming very isolated, becoming very distanced from her friends and family, and just he becomes her whole world, and he is not worthy of being that. No one should be your whole world, but he is definitely not worthy of that. So it was very upsetting to read, because I think this is a very real experience that does happen to people, and the main character was really well written because she is a strong, interesting character in her own right. You know, this happens to real people. It is so easy to be manipulated in this way. So that was very upsetting. I'm not sure I was totally convinced by the ending, but I also think there was a level of ambiguity there that I did enjoy. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this one for a very dark, very quick read. Then I read a really weird book. So this is Paradise Rot by Jenny Hval. This is translated from Norwegian, by the way. This one was translated from Icelandic. I was gifted this one by Verso in exchange for an honest review. And honestly, I don't really know what to say about this one. It was so weird. It was too weird for me. I'd heard of this before from Sophie from Portal in the Pages. She'd included it in a video. I think it was the one she did on dark books by women. So I'd had this on my radar for a while. But I think a lot of it just went over my head. I liked the creepy atmosphere. I was definitely mesmerised while reading it. I didn't feel inclined to put it down. And again, I read it, I think, pretty much all in one train ride. There is so much, for some reason, there is so much talk of we in this book that I don't know what it was supposed to mean. Like, that clearly was supposed to be a theme because it just kept coming up. Her listening to her roommate weeing, describing the sound of it, imagining it. Several times her roommate would come into her room and get into bed with her and wee on her. And I just didn't know why. It was also, there was an element of a queer love story in there, and I liked the atmosphere there and the description of like, queer desire and longing, but it wasn't exactly a representation of a queer relationship that I like loved reading about. All in all, it was a strange little horror story that I had a fine time reading. I would definitely like someone to explain what the hell was going on in it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because I'm not sure what I got from it. Then I hauled Mexican Gothic and I read Mexican Gothic, so that cancelled each other out there. I really wanted to like this one and I just didn't get it. So I read this one. I've got a whole reading vlog of me reading this. I will link below, where I read books about mushrooms because I heard this one was about mushrooms. And it is. Funny enough, so was Paradise Rock, but I read that before filming the mushroom vlog. But this is another mushroom horror story that went over my head. I don't seem to understand books about mushrooms. There was lots that I did like about this. I enjoyed reading it fine. I was really enjoying it at the beginning, but as the book went on, I completely lost the plot. Or rather, I think the book completely lost the plot, and it lost me. Essentially, it's about a young woman called Noemi, who is a socialite. This is set in the 50s in Mexico, and she receives an urgent letter from her recently married cousin Katrina, who has married an Englishman, but they live in Mexico, so she's now living in this sort of grand English mansion with her husband and his family. And she gets a strange letter from her saying that, you know, something strange is going on, she needs help. So Noemi goes to stay to see what's going on. And yeah, I really enjoyed it at first. It's very, very creepy. The house is very creepy. The people were very scary. There's a lot of themes of gentrification and white supremacy. This English family who have kind of come and assumed this land in Mexico and see themselves as racially superior. All of that was very eerie and unsettling. So I liked where it was going. And then there is a mushroom plot that just did not connect in my brain. I don't actually know what happened, so I can't tell you. If you could tell me, put some spoiler warnings below, put like a mushroom emoji if you're going to do spoilers, so people can avoid it if they don't want spoilers, and then tell me what the hell happened in this book. And then another mushroom book I borrowed from Scribd, The Beauty by Aliya Whiteley, and then I read The Beauty, so again that balanced it out. And again, I've got no idea what happened in this one. This one I didn't like at all. At least Mexican Gothic, there are definitely parts of that book that I enjoyed. The Beauty, I was just in a constant state of bafflement and slight disgust. I think it's an exploration of gender, but I couldn't quite tell you what it was saying. It is about a strange illness that before the beginning of the book had killed off all the women by growing mushrooms inside them. And then at the start of the book, or the novella, it's very, very short, these mushrooms start like growing on the graves, and then mushroom creatures come out of them, and then it becomes this weird horror story about the mushrooms versus the people, and it was absolutely batshit, and I've got no idea what any of that was for. Again, mushroom emoji for spoilers, and then tell me what happened if you know what happened. Then I hauled a very, very exciting proof from work. This is the Christie Affair. So this is a really cool proof cover. The real cover is gonna look like that. I'll put it, you'll be able to see it. This is what it's gonna look like. So this sounds absolutely amazing. I'm so excited. So this is a fictional retelling of the real life disappearance of Agatha Christie. So in case you didn't know, Agatha Christie is a very well-known mystery writer, but the biggest mystery surrounding her is that she herself disappeared once for 11 days. And no one knows what happened to her, including her. When she was found, she had absolutely no memory, or said she had no memory of what happened. So this is a fiction novel retelling the story of what happened, but from the perspective of Agatha Christie's husband's mistress. She was also a real person, so when the real life disappearance happened, Agatha Christie had, I think, recently discovered that her husband had a mistress. I can't remember the mistress's name, but she had a name. And when Agatha Christie was found, she had kind of unconsciously checked herself into a hotel under the mistress's name. So clearly this was like something very important going on. And anyway, this is a book from that woman's perspective. It's coming out at the beginning of next year, and I cannot wait to tell you more about it. Then I bought Detransition Baby, and then I read Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, and I absolutely loved it. This one was, is that my first 5-star of the month? I think so. This was definitely a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. So this is about 3 characters. We have a trans woman called Reese, who is the first main character that we meet. She was previously in a relationship with a woman called Amy, who has now detransitioned to become Ames. And then Ames is now in a relationship with a cis woman called Katrina. Is she called Katrina? Yeah, she's called Katrina. And Katrina has become pregnant. Ames thought that he was infertile after having transitioned the first time, and so it's a bit of a shock that he has got Katrina pregnant. And the 3 of these characters have to figure out a way to raise this child, or how they can be a kind of new, unconventional type of family. So, there is so much going on in here. I was really intrigued from the beginning to read this, because detransitioning is something that I have only ever heard before in the context of something that is brought up by anti-trans people who use it as a kind of a fear-mongering thing, that we shouldn't be letting young people transition because they will only regret it and then want to detransition. That's the only context I've ever heard this in before. So I was a bit like wary when I first heard this, but this book is written by a trans woman. It was longlisted for the Women's Prize, so I was really intrigued to see a kind of more nuanced approach to the concept of detransitioning, because detransitioning is something that happens, is something that some people do. So while it is used as a fear-mongering tactic, that doesn't mean that it is necessarily a bad thing or something that we should shy away from. Anyway, this book was just very complicated. It was so nuanced. It took absolutely everything that I thought I knew about gender and trans identity and just completely like scrambled it up, threw it in the bin, start again, and I loved that. I loved getting to meet 3 such different women with such different stories and different gender identities and different approaches to queerness and discovery of their own queerness. Ames was a really, really interesting character with a really interesting backstory. All 3 of these characters are quite prickly and difficult and complicated and contradictory, and all of the issues in here are also really difficult and contradictory, and I loved a book that wasn't afraid to present them as contradictory and say that's okay. It's okay that we can't categorise everything that simply into right or wrong, black and white. Actually, everything is very confusing, overlapping shades of grey, and that's pretty wonderful. I read this one for my book club with my offline friends, so we haven't had the book club yet, but I'm really excited to talk to everyone about it, so I feel like we're going to have a lot to say. Then I hold 2 books I was gifted by the publisher. These are 2 books about trans issues. I was just very interested after having read Detransition Baby. So this one is called Transitions. It is an anthology of 8 stories about being trans, different people's experiences. These are all 8 new writers. And then this one, Trans Power by Juno Roche, is a book that kind of aims to redefine the meaning of trans and trans identity, and to create it as its own identity with its own strength and beauty and autonomy, and also features loads of different contributors. So again, it has a diverse range of trans experiences featured in here. So I'm really looking forward to reading both of these and learning more. So at this point, I would like to pause and point out to you that my books are currently balanced. But wait, there's more, because I kept reading. So next, I read a book from my trolley, The Mothers by Brit Bennett. Brit Bennett is the author of The Vanishing Half, which I read last year, which a lot of people read last year and loved. This one was actually her debut novel that came out before that. So I finally got around to reading it, and I really, really liked it. It took me a little bit longer to get into. At first, I wasn't sure that I was liking it as much as The Vanishing Half, but like, full disclosure, that might not have been anything to do with the book. It might have been because I kept picking it up when I only had a very short time to read, so that's like possibly why I just didn't get into it, is because I was just reading it in like tiny little bits. Once I sat down and got into it, I absolutely loved it. And this one was one that was really interesting because a very central theme in this book is abortion. It is about a girl who gets pregnant as a teenager by mistake. The father is the preacher's son, They all live in this very religious community, and she decides not to keep the baby, and the book is really about the effects of her choice to have an abortion, or the decision that they make for her to have an abortion, and the hurt that it continues to cause various different characters over the next decade. Which, if you put that on paper, I wouldn't have thought I would be interested in reading, because that could sound like it's like propaganda. You know, I'm pro-choice, I'm not interested in reading a book that's about like abortion will cause harm to this many people. But I think this book was written so amazingly, because I've got absolutely no clue what Brit Bennett's personal views are on abortion, and I don't really need to know for the sake of reading this. This was more a character study. This was a story about these various characters who did grow up in a very religious community. What would the effect of abortion be on these characters? That's what this story was. I didn't feel like it was making any wider point about the morality or immorality of abortion. It was just a story about how these characters were affected by it. Does that make sense? I actually just paused to Google this because I was interested to see what Brit Bennett has to say about this. And she talked about how basically in her book, the portrayal of this abortion in these characters' lives goes against the standard political line, which is that abortion is either a life-ruining event or absolutely no big deal. So she was saying that completely aside from politics, those options are just too simple for her. That wasn't the book she wanted to write. In this story, this abortion was a defining event in these characters' lives. It is by no means a life-ruining event. It is not even portrayed, it's not portrayed as something that shouldn't have happened, but it is a defining event, and that's the story that she was telling by these characters. So I think that makes a lot of sense and made a really, really interesting book. It's also a book about mothers in lots of different ways. So there is the girl who gets pregnant at the beginning and has to make a choice about whether or not to become mother, but we also learn a lot about different characters' mothers and mother figures in people's lives, and a lot of it is narrated in a kind of Greek chorus style from the church mothers in this community. So mothers become a really important theme, but with a very broad definition of what a mother is. Then I read the Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa, and I gave this one 5 stars as well because I cried so much. So much. It takes a lot for me to cry at a book. I used to say that I don't cry at books, but some of you will have seen me sobbing to a little life. Turns out I do, and this one had me sobbing. It's about a cat, and I'm not really a cat person, but I'm a dog person, and I think this book will just make any animal person, any pet person, feel so many emotions. I know for a lot of people, before reading these kind of books, it's very important to them to know whether or not the pet dies. That's a question. There's like a whole website, does the dog die? Because I agree with you, that's a very important question for me to also know the answer to. So I'm not going to say it out loud because you might not want to know, but I will put at the bottom of the description box the answer to that question. So if you want to know before reading it, you can find out there. This is about a cat who is a stray cat who is adopted by a single man in his early 30s or late 20s at that point, and it's about their relationship. And at the start of this book, the man, Satoru, is taking Nana, the cat, on a journey to meet several of his old school friends. But we don't exactly know why, what is going on. He's looking for someone to look after Nana, and we don't know why that is. And slowly it all becomes clear, and it's a lot. I love pets so much. They mean so much to us. I honestly think this book did such a good job of portraying the relationship between a human and their animal companion. It's like the love that comes from the human to a pet. Anyone with pets will understand, like, the love that you feel for them is just so, like, overwhelmingly strong. But then also, this book is written from the cat's perspective, by the way. And from the cat's perspective, it's a different kind of love that goes back. It's not the kind of sentimental love that we might feel for our pets. It's more of like an unwavering loyalty. And I loved that, and it felt really real. I like to imagine that is what my dog feels. I don't think she looks at me as like, oh, she's so cute, I want to hug her. But I think she's like, I am your dog, I am here for you, you know? In her little dog brain. Anyone else hot? Just me. Finally, I read this one, Love Letters, Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville-West. This is one that's been hanging about on my trolley for quite a while, and I've been like slowly reading it, but I finally finished it this month. It is as you might suggest, a collection of letters between Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville-West, who were two amazing writers in the 20s and 30s, and also had a very long-lasting romantic relationship. So in this book we get to see letters to each other, or like extracts from letters to each other. We get to see little diary entries. We also get to see some letters that Vita wrote to her husband Harold, who she also very much loved. They had an open marriage, and a very strong marriage, a very loving marriage. So I learned a bit about these characters before, these real historical figures before. I know quite a lot about them. They're very famous, but I have read a few years ago Portrait of a Marriage by Nigel Nicholson, who is Vita Sackville-West's son. And he wrote this book that's all about his parents' marriage. But in that, he does talk openly about Vita's various affairs. So she had a very, very passionate love affair long before she ever met Virginia Woolf with a woman called Violet. They tried to run away together. And I remember reading that, that really broke my heart, that story. This one is a less, dramatic passion, but so much love and passion in here. And we get basically 20 years, I think 19 years of their relationship. It has a very intense period kind of in the middle, where their relationship first becomes physical, and then there's parts where it drifts off and then comes back with an intensity. And yeah, it was just really moving to get to learn more about these women. I've read a novel by Vita Sackville-West that I really enjoyed, and I'm intrigued to read more. I have read a few novels by Virginia Woolf and never loved them that much, but now I'm intrigued. Now I want to read them again, and so now I kind of have more of a picture of who she was. And also you get to hear behind the scenes of her writing these famous novels, which was really cool. I'd like to read them with that knowledge and see if I get on a bit better with them. So not only are my books balanced, I have actually managed to reduce my TBR by 3 whole books, which I think deserves a congratulations. If you want to see how all this affects my book trail progress, make sure you are subscribed and watch out, because in a few days I will post my update there. I'm going to film it immediately after this, but I will post it separately, just because I know some people like to just watch the book trail bits separately. So you'll get to see how I'm doing with my various year-long challenges and how all of this has helped. Basically, a good reading month. It started off pretty weak. I didn't like all the mushroom books. Finished with a few real bangers. Let me know in the comments below the best book that you have read this month that you think I should try, and I will get some recommendations from there, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!
She's a Mona Lisa. Everyone's lining up to see her. She's a Mona Lisa.